Upasama Prakarana, The Quaisans, Chapter 6, The Story of Uddalaka. The sun was in its zenith, flooding the earth with its abundant energy, while the earth was parched and cracked, thirsty for water. The trees appeared to be looking up at the sky for clouds, the messengers of plenty. The foliage had lost its green color, not only due to the sparse supply of sap, but also the guest in the form of a layer of fine dust settled on the leaves due to winds and an occasional vehicle passing by, or the dust carried by the hooves of the cattle going to and fro their grazing grounds. The winding road of red mud was leading further into the thickening forest. About 50 paces from the road, there was a pond reflecting the trees on its bank, and an old stone temple where the villagers offered their devotion, shared their vow and joys. The pond was a spot where every inhabitant of the village had to visit at least once a day, and that included the cattle, for it was the only source of water for the village. That day, the heat was more oppressive than ever. The old men were resting under a huge banyan tree with a cool shadow, while the middle-aged were sitting around speculating about the monsoons, and the youth as well as the children were absorbed in their dreams and play. The fields were tilled, the soil lumps broken and receptive, the thatches of huts repaired and ready to face the monsoon. And now their eyes were full of plans for the harvest and the resultant prosperity. Suddenly, an old man sat up, his eyes shining and nose turned in the direction of southeast. Everyone became alert, following the direction of his gaze. He did not have to say anything, for they all could get the smell of the damp earth. The youth climbed up the hillock nearby and noticed with satisfaction the dark clouds laden with the precious water. Instinctively, all of them moved towards the ancient stone structure of the temple to offer their gratitude. And the very next day, the monsoons hit the place. The thirst of the earth was quenched. The dust in the atmosphere re-entered the earth and was washed off from the leaves. It was as if the rain had rejuvenated the entire earth, and in a matter of days, the earth was dressed in a lush green garment of grass. The new shoots from the sleeping seeds below the ground and the trees' branches above saw the light of the day. It was not that anything new was created, but the care offered by the rain woke up the system towards its full bloom. Human beings are also like this. In a certain milieu, they forget the power within to suffer needless misery, while in a proper milieu, they remember their own strength to move towards the destiny of fulfillment. Perhaps that is how it has always been. Unless one has experienced the blinding darkness, one may not know the value of light. Unless one has gone through the pangs of misery, joy is taken for granted. And unless one has known the turmoil of disturbance, one may not be able to appreciate the resting peace. Just as the dryness and sweltering heat of the summer has the role of giving the taste of earth to the leaves, who are otherwise separated from it, the turmoil and misery churns the consciousness to whip out means and methods for overcoming them. None of the creatures, except the human beings, can recognize and understand the paradoxes of life, as only man is endowed with a reasoning mind. Mind has its advantages as well as the disadvantages. Manas, sensing the world, buddhi, reason, chittam, memory, are no doubt necessary and useful, as they have been instrumental in ushering all the progress made by man. But the desires, greed, fear, suspicion, and the like have always created anxiety, worry, tension, and violence. During such times, latter have been having stronger influence on the human destiny. The mind gets its motivation for occupation and strength through the non existing things. For instance, man was always fascinated by the birds. This fascination made him realize that he did not have any wings needed to fly in the sky. The limitation goaded him in developing wings through his power of invention and succeed in covering large distances in small intervals of time through airplanes and jets. However, such inventive geniuses are necessarily few in number, and many, if not most of us, are under the negative influence of the mind. The mind dwells on things which are not, and becomes a victim of desires, greed, and the like. The ambitions and the goals we set for ourselves are products of such thoughts directed at non existing things. Since the mind exists only on the non existent, the wise have said the mind itself is non existent. It is a negative phenomena, like darkness, which is nothing but the absence of light. So also is the mind, which is an absence. There are two ways of dwelling on non existent things: the past with the memories, nostalgia or hurts, wounds and bitterness, and future with dreams, ambition or goals, fantasy, anxiety and worry. On a careful self observation and analysis, one is surprised to discover that the mind never can remain in the present or the here now. And this state of here now is always a state of poise that transcends the duality of paradoxes. Consequently, mind evaporates when one is in the present, and with the dissolution of mind, one transcends the duality, the prime cause of pain. This wonderful discovery made the spiritual scientists devise various techniques and methods to wean the seeker out of this stubborn habit called mind, or more appropriately, minding. And like all habits, mind is also an activity. Since each one of us has a singular and unique nature, our individual mental occupation differs. Consequently, no two persons can have the identical method for quietening the mind. The sages, no doubt, have given suggestions for 4 broad categories of persons. They are action-oriented, reason-oriented, emotion-oriented, and will-oriented. This does not mean that such persons do not have the other faculties, but only that they are governed by one of them predominantly. We find in our sacred texts like Upanishads or the Bhagavad Gita many techniques. In fact, they are so diverse as to be very confusing. So the first task of the seeker is to discover her or his own nature. Though it's very difficult, the thrill of seeking and the joy of discovery make the seeker's journey worthwhile and adventurous. While giving several hints, this grand scripture also helps one in understanding one's own nature through the characteristic features of the mind and ahankara. In the last sarga, the phenomenon of Maya was described through the story of Gadhi. Maya starts affecting the mind with lack of awareness or forgetfulness. The present sarga gives practical hints on the mind quieting techniques through certain yogic practices. Muni Vasishta continued that a careless mind attracts problems, and that only cure of this disease called samsara is through manonasha, or the destruction of mind. The mind indulges in the present through external objects, and in the future and past through sankalpa, asha, anusandhanam. Sage Vasishta urges Rama to eliminate these which afflict the mind every moment, and by doing so, he assured one can achieve virtue. Vasishta Chandrika, the gloss on the scripture, defines these three activities as Evameva karishyam iti manasam karma sankalpaha idam me syaditi prarthanam asha atitanusmarana anusandhanam. I will do such and such a thing. This mental action is sankalpa. This should happen to me. Such wishful thinking is asha. Repeated recollection of the past is anusandhanam. Pure awareness, devoid of any such mental activity, has been called as pratyak chetanam, a state of tranquility. When this tranquility becomes a part of one's nature, there is no room for any disturbance. This is adherence to the truth. This is auspicious, all-knowing, quiescent and ultimate state. The sage blessed Rama to succeed in eliminating ignorance through viveka, diligent effort, and also understanding the essence of spiritual books. In the following shlokas, Sage Vasishta gave some very valuable hints to Rama for quietening the mental activity. Though engaged in normal activities like talking, giving up, accepting, opening or closing the eyelids, etc., one should ever be engaged in contemplation of the infinite and live the essence of the wisdom, totally severing the bheda vasanas like this I, that he, etc. Being ever established in one should live the essence of wisdom. Purging the mind of all impurities and destroying the bondage causing desire, live the essence of wisdom. Through equanimous vision, transcending the disease-causing paradoxes like good, evil, and auspicious and inauspicious, one must live the essence of wisdom. Giving up even the differentiation of spiritual and mundane, one should live in the world by getting attached to the pillar of Atman, achieve the stability. The moment one gets this change of view, one is totally freed from all conception of duality and its pain-giving progeny. The first of these shlokas uses the very line as two of the loftiest shlokas from the Bhagavad Gita, expressing the same idea. Naiva kinchit karomiti yukto manyeta tattvavit pashyan shrinman sprushan jighran ashnan gachan swapan shwasan pralapan visrijan grandhan unvishan nimishan napi indriyan indriyartheshu vartanta iti dharayan. The experiencer of self is convinced that he is totally free from any activity as he is not the doer, in spite of being in the process of seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, going, sleeping, breathing, speaking, renouncing, accepting, closing and opening of eyelids, as all these activities are nothing but the senses coming in contact with their objects. These grand shlokas not only describe the state of the experienced wise, but analyze the reasons why others fail to achieve the state, thereby suggest methods to do so. The first suggestion is to avoid indulgence at the sense level and instead try to witness all actions as if from a distance. Every one of us is familiar with such acts of witnessing in day-to-day life. The most common one is when a friend experiences a personal loss. We approach him or her and try to offer consolation. Every person approaching such a sufferer especially in our country, gives a philosophical flavor to his speech made to console the sufferer. This is so because the advisor is not involved and it is happening to someone else. But it is an altogether different matter if the same thing happens to those very persons who had offered such consolation to others. What these shlokas suggest is to transcend the indulgence at the body and sense level and involvement at the psychic level. Whenever there is an experience of happiness, one touches this state of no mind, though for an infinitesimal length of time. This truth slips out of our observation not only because of the tiny interval of time, but due to wrong identification with the ephemeral things like the body or those things related to body like objects of senses, family, etc. They are nearby, that are nearby during the experience. Their contact may have resulted in the experience of pleasure or pain, but what actually happens is the mind gets enfeebled and touches a silence. The next culprit is the ahankara, which brings in I-mine, evoking attachment and infatuation. To overcome the problems, he suggested the seeker to eliminate desires or bhoga vasanas having the binding effect and to totally eschew bheda vasana having the blinding effect that differentiates things, events or ideas like good and evil, as both these vasanas nurture and enhance the mental activity. The mind becomes stronger with each birth, and consequently, the whole effort gets diverted towards gain and loss of objects in the world. And by quelling ahankara, which happens to be the main root of the activity of mind, this duality vanishes. After giving this introduction, sage Vasishta proceeded to narrate the story of Muni Uddalaka. Muni Uddalaka lived on the slopes of Gandhamadana hills, thick with sylvan and fragrant forests. He was of sharp intellect and inquiring spirit, and had purged his mind of all impurities. And yet, he had not succeeded in making his mind quiescent. But due to his nishkama tapas, or penance without any longing for the fruit, and observance of yama and niyama, clear discrimination dawned on him. He began to meditate thus: what is the state beyond all pain, the imperishable state which transcends the pangs of rebirth? Should I not seek this instead of falling victim to the sankalpa? He put his efforts to concentrate his mind, but jumped from one sense object to the other and from one thought to another. The internal turmoil expressed itself on the physical plane through his restless wandering in the forest. At last, Muni Uddalaka came across a cave where no creature lived, which was totally secluded and hard to approach. There the Muni entered alone. Spreading the deerskin over a grass mat, he adopted the lotus posture and started reflecting. The lotus has always found a place in the poetry of Vedanta. It grows healthily in stagnant, muddy water. In spite of the fact that it is born in such water, the lotus remains untouched by it. Although it is nourished by the mud and dirty water, it does not inherit any of the dirtiness or stank. On the contrary, the lotus has always stood for the symbol of beauty and purity. Rama has been called as Rajiva Lochana, the lotus-eyed, not only because of their beauty, but also because of their discriminative and discerning nature. More than anything else, the lotus symbolizes viveka or discrimination arising from paradoxical experiences one meets and greets at every stage of journey called life. Padmasana, or the lotus posture mentioned here is not just a physical posture, but more a mental posture of the aloneness to be adopted by a seeker interested in vichara. The most important thing is to totally quieten all mental activity. Uddalaka adopted a technique of addressing his own mind. Mind is like a mischievous child, and it can be brought under control in three different ways. The first, by cajoling; secondly, by admonition; and thirdly, by disinterested witnessing. In cajoling, there is an effort towards understanding, while in admonition, there is this force of the will, and in the disinterested witnessing, there is an effort to dissociate from the activity. Uddalaka started addressing his own mind. O my ignorant mind, of what use is your illusory activity? Why do you choose the hot and poisonous desert instead of garden of kalpa trees? All your activity is useless, capable of producing intense pain. Why are you not able to fix yourself into a state of quiescence? Oh, the ever-expanding and foolish mind of mine, do not die like the karanga deer that gets attracted to the sound of music created by the hunter. Do not be like the tusker madly in search of its mate, in search of sense object of touch, or the moth which loses its life for the light or the sense of object of sight. You should not associate with the taste and die like a fish caught in the bait. O mind, do not be after even the smell, to die like a bee in the quest of honey, to get trapped in a lotus. Each of these dies through sound, touch, sight, taste and odor. But you are afflicted with all the five combined together. In those persons who have become recipient in Atmanusandhanam, or being in the self, manas or the lower mind has to be transcended. Without giving up the grosser activity, how can you possibly feel and understand the subtler activity? Though the five organs are without any vasanas, they still have the attraction for their respective objects. So, it is mandatory that your grosser activity be totally silenced. Behold, the culprit of I, the root cause of all sankalpa. Having done this, you will see that all your limited feeling will vanish and the experience of all expansiveness dawn. Many enlightened persons have adopted this method of addressing the mind, not only to achieve quiescence for them, but to guide the struggling seekers. Acharya Shankara, in his Upadesha Sahasri, addresses the mind thus: Aham mameti tvamanarthamichasi pararthamichanti tavanya ihitam natertha bodho nahi mesti charthitha tatascha yukta shama evate manaha yato na chanya paramat sanatanat sadaiva triptohamato na merthitha sadaiva triptascha nakamaye hitam yatastvate chatah prashamayate hitam. O mind, indulging in vain ideas like me and mine, you are not treading the path towards true peace and happiness, but that of danger. You have no discrimination of the right and wrong. On the other hand, I am always content and blissful, as I do not depend on anything on the outside world. The proper thing for you, then, is to remain quiet. As I am not different from the Supreme Reality, I am always content and without any desires. Being always content, I desire no welfare for myself. Since I wish your own welfare, please take my advice and have shama, that is, be quiet. Saint Kabir addresses the mind in one of his many songs. Are man dheeraj kahe na dhare, पशु पंछी जीव कीट सब की शुद्ध करे, गर्भवास में सबर लेतु है, बाहर क्यों बिसरे, मन तू हसन से साहिब के भटकत काहे फिरे, प्रीतम छाड़ और को धारे, कागज इख न सरे. O mind, why can't you be patient? We sense the presence that cares for the animals, birds, insects, and other creatures. If I gave you radiance while you were in the womb, won't it care for you outside? O mind, forgetting the beauty of Sahib within, why do you roam about aimlessly? Ignoring the beloved, you go after the other as you do. There has to be failure in whatever you do. Samarth Ramdas, the spiritual preceptor of Chhatrapati Shivaji, has written what have come to be known as Manache Shloka in Marathi. These 205 verses are addressed to the mind and have been of great help to seekers all these centuries. In the process of addressing his own mind, Muni Uddalaka realized that the real culprit is Sankalpa, which must be tackled instead of senses, and the Sankalpa arises from the mistaken notion of separateness. In this way, he went on transcending the grosser to behold the subtler principles governing his mental activity. Sage Vasishta continued his narration. As and when Muni Uddalaka became more and more quiet, his body too adopted an elegant posture depicting his inner state of stability. In such state of mind, of pranava vibrating spontaneously from him. When he intoned the first sound akara in the pranava, having 3.5 matras, prana, the cosmic energy, entered his body, making it shine with effulgence. Then the process of rechaka or expiration took place as the prana left the body to make it light and burdenless. The Jnana Agni or the fire of wisdom pervaded his being and burnt up all residual vasanas. This first stage of pranava was not through the Hatha Yoga, for it has a tendency to create pain. In the second stage of Ukara, the immovable kumbhaka took place, characterized by equilibrium of external and internal breath, to bring about a state of total awareness of the body. Then the Makara, or the third quiescent stage of pranava, called Puraka, inspiration, was reached. With the last half matra of Makara, total fulfillment was attained. Muni Uddalaka reached a state of quiescence beyond body, senses and mind. With these disturbing activities gone, he overcame the darkness to behold the spiritual sun, eliminating moha, delusion. Gradually he passed into Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the state of total quiescence. Being in the state of for long, he became Chit, consciousness itself, and was totally freed from attractions and aversions. Noticing this great event, the Siddhas, Devas, and others started flocking around him, offering him their respects and also temptations. But the Muni was too aware to succumb to such temptations. Transcending time, Uddalaka was ever engaged in Nirvikalpa Samadhi and merged into Chit Samanya, universal consciousness, and then into Satta Samanya, universal being. Rama then requested the sage to throw more light on the state of Satta Samanya, to which Vasishta replied, when the mind, being denuded of all vikalpas, becomes the all-pervasive Chit Samanya and ultimately becomes totally devoid of all thoughts, then this Chit Samanya itself is Satta Samanya. When all visible things cease to have any disturbing effect on one's consciousness, and when the knowledge of all mental modifications or vritti jnana gets merged into the consciousness of the self, then this consciousness itself is called Satta Samanya. When all internal and external objects get annihilated and the traces of mind exist as consciousness itself, then this Chit Samanya is Satta Samanya. Like a tortoise withdrawing itself into its shell, if one withdraws oneself into the self, then this state is Satta Samanya. That supreme vision, nurtured by Jivan Muktas and Videha Muktas, is Satta Samanya. This divine vision arises in such persons who have either developed Samadhi through the wisdom of Viveka or voluntarily through memory of previous actions, but never in ignorant persons who are still under the influence of body, senses, mind or ahankara. Such vision is inseparable from the wise, like wind and atmosphere or earth and odor. After living in this state for a long period, for him there was no time, as he had transcended time. Uddalaka became a Videha Mukta. A man used to earn his livelihood by catching colorful birds from the forest and selling them to people interested in having them as their pets. One day, he was waiting for a transport by the side of the road. His wire cages with the innocent prisoners were kept on the ground. The bird catcher was brooding and did not notice that one of the cages had opened and a bird had managed to come out. The free bird started exploring the surroundings, while the others, in the other cages, started making noise. But the man was too involved with his thoughts to hear the sound. Surprisingly, the free bird did not take advantage of its freedom. Instead, it re-entered its cage. Meanwhile, a pedestrian saw the door open of the cage and pointed it out to the bird catcher, who promptly closed it. The fate of bird was sealed. Something similar happens to the human beings. Even now and then, we do find openings for escape, but we are very concerned about the security, social norms and customs, and our own love for bondage like the bird, and miss many opportunities. Like an anchor, grounding or at least restricting the movement of the ship, mind with its activity enslaves the consciousness, keeping it at the levels of body, sense, mind, intellect and ego all the time. The greatest impediment a seeker faces is this ever-present activity of mind that keeps changing its content by constantly changing the levels of being all the time. Added to this, it also has the moment in time like the past and the future. The only way in which the mind ceases to exist is in the present. All imaginable methods try to keep the consciousness on the present. Of course, each method tries to do this from a particular level. For example, asanas do this by developing awareness at the body level. But then, unless there is persistent effort, it is rather difficult. Even in an experienced seeker who has enfeebled his vasanas like Muni Uddalaka in the story, the mind keeps jumping from one object to the other. This story suggests some yogic techniques leading the aspirant towards samadhi. It mentions the word yama, niyama, asanam, puraka, rechaka and kumbhaka, the last three of which form the steps of pranayama. However, it should be taken as only a general suggestion, as it keeps repeating that it is nothing to do with Hatha Yoga. An aspirant interested in curbing the mental activity necessarily leads a disciplined life which is done through yama, niyama. The body, which is only the gross manifestation of the mind, has to be studied through asanam. Breathing is connected very intimately with the mind. That is where the pranayama comes in. Only after these stages can one hope to handle the mental activity directly through meditation. Generally, a seeker commits 3 mistakes on the meditation seat. The 3 mistakes are at 3 different levels. First, and perhaps the most gross of the mistakes the seeker makes or commits, is the involvement with the thoughts. One sits and tries to keep the attention on the chosen mantra or devata, or even on one's breath. Very soon, one gets carried away into the current of thoughts. Only after a while does one realize that one is sitting for meditation, trying to calm the mind. Through constant practice, one is able to retain the memory of the effort for longer intervals. When this happens, one succeeds in keeping oneself apart from the mental activity to an extent. At this stage, one tends to commit the second mistake of trying to stop the thoughts. This enforcement does have a temporary quieting effect. But when one slackens the force, the activity starts with vengeance. It is like traffic congestion. With the red signal, the traffic is forced to stop, but as and when it gets changed to green, it continues, perhaps with more intensity. Many meditators experience this. During the period of their sitting, the mind does behave itself and they have an experience of calmness. But when they get up or cease their effort, the thoughts come in torrents. So once again, the best solution is to be non-involved witness to these thoughts. This apartness helps the seeker in developing the Sakshi Bhava, and though the activity may take time to cease, it will definitely cease to have a disturbing effect. The activity does not disturb the seeker anymore, and perhaps it has thinned down to a great extent. But then one notices that there are such thoughts which one may not get during the normal times when one is not on the meditation seat. They may be on violence, greed, or lust. One may not get them even in dreams. This is when the seeker tends to commit the third mistake of changing the thoughts from bad to good. This act of changing the thoughts seems only justifiable because the thoughts produce raga or attraction and dvesha or aversion. Paradoxically, by changing the thoughts, one only increases the likes and dislikes, as it means that one still has the preferences and choice. At this stage of the journey, anything and everything only helps in continuing the mental activity, and the whole process of meditation is really meant to reduce this activity. A question arises as to why such thoughts float in the consciousness during meditation and not other times when one is engaged in the worldly activity. Actually, this is only apparent. While one is engaged in the so-called worldly activity, the active attention is on so many other things that one does not take note of the thoughts, maybe dreams or nightmares, which form a steady undercurrent of the consciousness. But when there is no other activity, as is the case when one is on the meditation seat, the undercurrent becomes very prominent. The second and perhaps the stronger reason for this phenomenon is that in spite of the fact that the mind has been quietened, the activity as such has not been totally curbed. It is very much there in the deeper layers of consciousness. The vasanas, forming the prime cause of the activity, are to be totally eliminated, which takes infinite patience of the seeker and perhaps time. The difference between the so-called good and bad thoughts is only one of intensity and not quality. But if one learns to adopt the posture of Sakshi Bhava, then one just becomes a disinterested witness, observing without any involvement the mischievous child called mind. In the mind quietening technique suggested by the Lord Buddha, one starts observing the incoming and outgoing breaths, and then the sensations in the body, and finally on the subtler activity of the mind. But the key is non-involved awareness. One is asked never to change the breathing pattern, to hate or love any sensation, thought or emotion. When one succeeds in accepting these as they are, then one transcends the activity and gets established in the center. Consequently, even when there is a tornado on the circumference, one is not disturbed. This is the implication when the story tells that Muni Uddalaka entered the cave alone. He was totally non-involved and had become a pure witness, established at the center of his consciousness. The parched earth awaits monsoon, while the dusty leaves await the cleansing shower to remove the layer of dust over them. But they depend totally on the whims of nature. We too have to wait till the disturbing mental activity with its sense cravings journeys into time and the ego trips thin out, and we are privileged to have the wisdom to get disturbed or miserable, as we mostly do, or to change the mental posture of involvement to that of non-involved witness. This posture is not really very difficult, but the eons of old habit of mental activity makes it so. Constant change is the rule of existence. Whether it is the drought or the flood, spring or winter, nothing is eternal, and this constant change is perceivable only due to something changeless. The eye of the storm remains peaceful while its arms spell disaster wherever they cross. If one is able to remain at the center or the eye, then nothing disturbs. But at the same time, one has to be careful not to have any preference, because it is the choice which takes one away from the center. Without a center, the circumference cannot exist, and without a circumference, the center becomes a meaningless point. The solution for the problem called mind is non-involvement, either with the circumference or the center, which alone paves way for the real freedom.